Let's dive right into this explainer and look at how the European Union is actually learning to work together to stay safe in a pretty crazy, changing world. So whether you're learning to build engines, maybe designing software, or managing a business, you know that having the right tools is absolutely crucial. But what if the job is just way too big for one person, or even one entire country? Today we're going to see how 27 different countries in Europe are teaming up, kind of like workers on a massive building site, sharing their tools to protect their future.
But to understand how the EU protects itself today, we first need to ask a super common question to clear up how things actually work behind the scenes. Does the EU have its own giant army? If you scroll through the news, you might see people talking about this massive European army. Before we dig into how the EU builds its security, we really need to figure out what's real and what's just a rumor. It's exactly like starting a new job, right? You've got to understand how the machinery really works before you just start pushing buttons. So, let's find out the truth.
Moving into Section 1, a changing world and learning to adapt.
See, for a long time, defense was a topic the EU actually avoided. But, just like any industry adapting to new tech, recent events forced the EU to change its approach. You know how it goes in any workplace? If the world around you changes and you don't update your equipment, well, you fall behind. Three things acted as massive wake-up calls here. First, the US started focusing more on itself with an America-first kind of policy. This meant Europe realized, hey, we can't always rely on someone else to fix our problems. Second was Brexit. When the UK left the EU, the group lost a major military power, so the remaining 27 countries really had to step up. And third, the biggest shock of all, Russian aggression and the war in Ukraine right on the EU's borders. That was literally the ultimate alarm bell. It proved that the EU absolutely needed to be ready for worst-case scenarios to stay safe.
Okay, let's jump to Section 2, myths versus real facts.
In any trade, working with the wrong information can lead to some really big mistakes. So let's clear off our workspace and look at the actual facts about European defense. Now, while some think the EU was created to replace NATO for security, the fact is, NATO actually remains the main shield. Think of NATO like the main structural support of a huge building. It does the heavy lifting for defense. The EU isn't trying to tear that down and build a new one. No way. Instead, the EU acts as a complementary team. It supports NATO by handling specific crises, sending out civilian experts, and basically making sure the whole system is backed up.
And here is a huge one. Myth: the EU has a combined army. Fact: 27 member states share their own forces. There is no giant EU army. Instead, it's all about individual countries choosing to lend their own people and tools for specific shared tasks. This totally answers our big question from earlier. Imagine a massive construction project. The project manager doesn't own all the workers and trucks, right? Instead, 27 different independent contractors decide to bring their own tools, their own trucks, and their own crews to help get a specific job done. They combine their forces only when they are willing and able to do so.
Which brings us to Section 3, working and building together.
So how does this actually work in practice? The EU basically splits its tasks into two main areas. You've got the internal workshop where they build new tech, and the external fieldwork where they manage crises and train others. On the internal side at home, the EU is doing a ton of research and development. They're looking at the future of technology, things like artificial intelligence, drones, cybersecurity, and missile defense. That's the workshop. Then on the external side, they go out into the field abroad. This means doing peacekeeping missions in places like the Balkans or Africa. It also involves very practical training. For example, while the EU cannot just send an army into Ukraine, they are actively using their skills to train Ukrainian soldiers. It's all about providing that practical, hands-on support. And to pay for all this, they use something called the European Defense Fund. By pooling their resources together, the member states are basically sharing the cost of really expensive workshop equipment, like those cyber defenses and drones. So everyone benefits without going broke. Think about it. If you want to start a business, buying every single high-tech machine totally by yourself is just incredibly expensive. But if you and 5 other professionals put your money together into a shared fund, you can buy the best equipment and all share it. That is exactly what the European Defense Fund does. By working together on research and development, they reduce costs and create amazing new tools that help protect everyone.
Let's wrap things up with Section 4, standing on our own.
Look, every project needs a clear goal. You don't just build things for no reason, right? For Europe, the absolute crucial point is strategic autonomy. That's a big, fancy term, but it's just like a young professional entering the workforce. The EU needs to be independent and capable of handling modern threats by itself. When you graduate and start your career, your goal is to be able to pay your own bills, fix your own problems, and stand on your own 2 feet. You want autonomy.
Well, the EU wants the exact same thing. In a world full of complex threats, like cyber attacks or hybrid warfare, no single country can fix the problem alone. But by actually working together, the EU builds the capacity to handle these challenges independently.
So, in a complex world, cooperation is our strongest tool. Whether you're building a house, fixing a computer network, or securing a whole continent, how can you use teamwork and shared resources to solve the really complex problems in your own future workplace? We've seen in this explainer today that the European Union doesn't rely on some giant imaginary army. Instead, they rely on cooperation. They share costs, they divide the practical work into internal development and external training, and they actually support their partners. They're building a resilient and ready system. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. When you face a huge challenge in your own career or life, one that just seems way too big to handle alone, who are you going to team up with and what tools will you build together to succeed?